What you're about to hear is the story of a kid buying his own food, clothes, and school supplies since age 12, while his parents ran up restaurant tabs and paid for cable packages they couldn't live without. Then his dad walked into the kitchen with a printed contract and told him to start paying $600 a month in rent. He was 14. He didn't sign. What he did instead, quietly, methodically, without losing his composure once, is one of the most calculated moves I've covered. This one's for every guy who ever had to figure it out alone, while the people who should have helped just watched. Let's go. My parents cut off my food and clothes at 12, then handed me a rent contract at 14. So I documented everything and let the government walk through their house. I'm 23 now, and I've been meaning to write this out for a while. Partly because it helps to get it down somewhere. Mostly because I know there are kids out there right now Googling, "Can my parents legally charge me rent at 1 in the morning?" And I want them to find this and understand they have options. So here it goes. My parents weren't abusive in the way most people picture. No hitting, nothing that would have been visible from the outside. What they were, and I've had years to get clear on this, was financially checked out. Not broke, not struggling, checked out. My dad had a solid salary at a financial consulting firm. My mom stayed home, and they had a house in a decent neighborhood, a 60-inch TV, a premium sports package, and a country club golf membership. They prioritized what they wanted and quietly moved everything else off their list. Their kid just happened to be one of those things. It started when I was 12. I asked my mom to sign a field trip permission slip, and she used the moment to inform me that since I was getting older, I should start buying my own school lunch. Her framing was, "You need to understand the value of hard work." I nodded because what are you going to do with that at 12 years old? From that point, the school supplies stopped. When I mentioned I needed notebooks and pencils, she told me to figure it out and pointed out that other kids my age had jobs. Which, fine. Except that conversation was happening while my dad sat in the next room watching his premium sports package on a television that cost more than everything on my school supply list combined. They'd just bought that TV a few months prior. Just thought that was worth mentioning. I started babysitting neighbors on weekends, dog walking after school. I figured out which dollar stores actually had usable supplies and which ones were garbage. I learned what unit price meant on a grocery receipt before most kids my age knew how to do laundry. The embarrassment of showing up to school in pants that were 2 inches too short, shoes held together mostly by hope, that kind of thing stays in your chest. But I got good at looking normal, kept my head down, and kept moving. Dad had a whole routine he did when I came home tired from work. "Look at our little entrepreneur," he'd say, grinning. Then he'd explain to whoever was listening that this was exactly why you don't just hand kids everything. He was proud of the lesson he was teaching. The part where he'd actually implemented any of it himself, that part he'd quietly skipped. But the lesson? He had that locked down. I was in the kitchen making myself a peanut butter sandwich for dinner while he delivered this speech. Just wanted to mention that. By 13, food had become its own situation. They'd started ordering takeout a few nights a week. Chinese food mostly, pizza sometimes. The burgers from a place near the highway that smelled incredible and cost more than my entire weekly food budget. The kitchen cabinets on my side were basically empty. I learned to stay in my room until they finished eating so I didn't have to sit there watching. My mom, mid-container of fried rice one evening, suggested I could just get a grocery store job and buy my own food, like an adult. I was 13. I nodded, filed it away. The lawn care business had started expanding around this time. I bought a used mower off a neighbor for $40, got a basic trimmer, and picked up a handful of regular clients on the street. By the end of 8th grade, I was clearing a few $100s a month, which, and I need to be direct here, is more financial discipline than either of my parents had demonstrated in years. I tracked every dollar in a budget notebook. I knew my margins. I compared prices per ounce on peanut butter, while they were impulse buying electronics, and paying restaurant prices for meals my mom could have made at home for a fraction of the cost. The math on their lifestyle didn't work, and I could see it clearly even then. I was 12, 13 years old, running a tighter budget than both adults in my house combined. At a family gathering, my mom told her sister it was embarrassing to have a son who dressed like he shopped at a thrift store. Said people would think they didn't take care of me. I was standing right there when she said it. I kept my face very still and said nothing. Dad had a thing he'd say to his friends at the country club about how his kid understood the value of a dollar, unlike these other kids whose parents gave them everything. He delivered it with genuine pride. Actually, I should back up. I'm pretty sure that particular speech happened during a Saturday round, which ran about $70 including the green fee. Whatever, doesn't change the point. The hypocrisy had reached a level where it was almost impressive, almost artful, honestly. Hold on. For the listeners at home, this is me, not the OP. I need everyone to sit with what just happened here. These parents set their 12-year-old on a mandatory independence program, watched him build a functioning business from nothing, and then started using his story to lecture other parents about soft kids. That's like a football coach who skipped every single practice, showing up to the championship game yelling, "I made this team." They were running someone else's highlight reel at their own show. And their kid is standing at a family gathering being told his secondhand clothes are embarrassing by the people who stopped buying him clothes. Just want everyone to be tracking that. Then my dad lost his job. He worked at the consulting firm, and one Tuesday came home carrying a box of desk stuff, looking like someone had knocked the wind out of him. The country club membership went quiet. Takeout orders slowed down. About 2 weeks in, my mom found me in the kitchen and asked, very casually, like she was asking me to pass something, if I could lend them some money for groceries. Just until your father finds something new. I want you to sit with the specific math of that moment. I was 13 years old. I had been purchasing my own groceries, my own clothing, and my own school supplies for over a year. I had a budget notebook with 2 years of tracked expenses. And now the adults in the house, who had been combining 2 incomes up until about 18 days ago, were asking the 8th grader for grocery money. I said no. Dad came to me the next day with a different angle. Family helps family, he said. He looked me in the eye and told me I was being selfish, that after everything they'd done for me, I should be willing to pitch in during a hard time. I reminded him, as calmly as I could manage, that I'd been buying my own food since I was 12 because he'd specifically told me to. He said that was different, and that's when I understood something that's been useful to me ever since. Whatever the rules were in this house, they applied when they were convenient for the people making them. That was the whole system. They kept asking every few days. I kept saying no. The tension in the house became background noise, something you mostly stopped noticing until something made you look right at it again. Then one night they both walked into the kitchen together while I was eating cereal. Mom sat down across from me. Dad stood behind her with a piece of paper in his hand. They had that specific expression, the one where the decision's already been made and they're informing you, not asking. Mom said they'd been thinking and believed it was time I started contributing to the household expenses. She said it the same way you'd say it's time you started taking out the trash. Then Dad put the paper on the table. It was a contract. Printed. Official-looking header, signature lines at the bottom. $600 a month plus utilities. Or I could find somewhere else to live. I was 14. I picked it up and let the math run automatically. In a good month, I cleared around $700 total from lawn care and pet sitting. Summer utilities at their house ran at least $200 when the AC was going all day. That left me roughly $100 on a perfect month to cover food, school supplies, equipment costs, and whatever else came up. There was no version of those numbers that ended anywhere except completely broke. I told them I needed time to think about it. Dad called me dramatic. Mom crossed her arms. I went to my room and shut the door. I opened my budget notebook and ran 3 different scenarios. They all ended the same place. Then I got on my phone and started researching whether parents could legally charge a minor child rent. I dug into state statutes, legal forums, legal aid websites, anything relevant I could find. Some forums had people saying their parents charged them rent as teenagers, and it was fine. Others said it was neglect. The legal aid sites were more specific. Parents are required by law to provide food, housing, and basic necessities until a child turns 17. Charging rent to a minor is questionable on its own. Charging rent while already failing to provide those necessities is a completely different conversation with a different legal name. I found one site that laid out the specific state obligations clearly, and I read it probably 4 times to make sure I understood it right. One forum post I found had a kid in a similar situation who said he'd contacted his school district's family services office and they'd connected him with free legal help. I wrote down the phrase legal aid in my notebook. Then I screenshot every relevant page I could find and saved everything to a folder. Backed it all up to a cloud account with a password they'd never guess. Fell asleep around 1 in the morning with the phone still in my hand, the screen still open to a legal aid page. My alarm went off and my eyes hurt from the small text. Okay, time out. Listeners, me jumping in. I need you to understand what this kid just did. His parents handed him a lease agreement at 14, and instead of crying, begging, or signing it, he cracked open a research session at midnight like a junior paralegal on deadline. He's not panicking. He's building a case. His parents thought they were cornering a kid and accidentally activated the one person in that house who actually reads contracts before signing. I'm going to go ahead and say it. The next few minutes of this story might be the most quietly satisfying thing I've covered on this channel. Stay with me. The next morning at school, I found the teacher I trusted, Mrs. Holloway, who taught me English the year before and had never made a big production out of anything. I'd talked to her once when my grades slipped and she'd handled it without any drama. I found her before first period and walked her through most of the situation. She listened, asked a handful of specific questions, and told me she had some contacts she wanted to reach out to. 3 days later, I was sitting across from a man named Nathan Cole in a small downtown office. He worked for a free legal aid organization, early 30s, glasses, a tie that didn't quite go with his jacket, file boxes stacked literally everywhere. One stack near the window had a coffee mug balanced on top that looked like it hadn't moved in months. He had me start from the beginning and tell him everything. I did. When I got to the rent contract, he stopped writing and looked up. He confirmed what the research had already suggested. Parents can't unilaterally decide to stop providing basic necessities and replace them with an invoice. The combination of 2 years without food or clothing support, plus a demand for $600 a month from a 14-year-old fell squarely into neglect territory under state law. He was clear about that, not alarmed, just matter-of-fact about it. I showed him everything. The budget notebook, every dollar made and spent from age 12. And yes, it was organized neatly because that was the whole point of keeping it. The documentation folder on my phone, photos of empty cabinets, their takeout bags in the trash, my own meals by comparison. His expression got tight looking through it. When I mentioned the mower being left out in the rain, I watched his jaw tighten a little more. Nathan said the documentation was solid and offered to send my parents a formal letter. Not a lawsuit threat, just a very clear professional notification spelling out their legal obligations and the specific statutes involved. He said it wouldn't force them to change anything, but it would make it impossible for them to claim they hadn't known where the line was. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He printed out information on my rights, gave me his direct number, and said to call if things moved fast. Walking out of that office, I definitely felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like someone with actual authority had been handed the same set of facts I'd been carrying around and had immediately understood what they meant. That felt significant. That evening, I came home to find my parents waiting on the contract. I told them I'd talked to a legal aid attorney. Mom's face went pale. Dad's jaw tightened. And then he started, about how I was threatening them, how I was turning a family matter into some legal situation, how I was making them look like bad parents. His voice climbed with every sentence. I waited for him to finish. Then I told him calmly what Nathan had walked me through. They were legally obligated to provide basic necessities regardless of any rent arrangement, and what had been happening in this house since I was 12 had a documented record and a legal name. I said I was happy to help with chores and contribute in reasonable ways, but I wasn't signing a contract that handed over my entire income. Mom started crying. I recognized that particular performance. I'd seen it enough times to know exactly what it was for. I turned and walked to my room. They screamed about ingratitude and disrespect behind me until a door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. I locked my bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and texted Mrs. Holloway to let her know what had happened. Wait. Listeners, me again. I want everyone to appreciate the chess that just played out. His dad prepared a full guilt trip monologue. His mom had the crying queued up and ready. They had the entire routine. And this 14-year-old walked in, let his father finish the complete speech, and then said, I'm paraphrasing, "Cool story, here's what a lawyer told me." No yelling, no begging, just the result, delivered calmly. Captain Financial Philosopher thought he was running a negotiation, and my guy showed up with a legal summary. You know what's better than winning an argument? Refusing to have one. He handed them the outcome and walked away. About a week later, the certified letter from Nathan arrived. I wasn't home when it came, but I could tell the second I walked through the door that evening. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table with documents spread out between them, and neither of them acknowledged me when I walked in. The air in that house had a specific dense pressure, like right before something breaks. They didn't approach me that night. The silence that followed was strange in its own way. Not quiet, just the absence of anything directed at me. They'd talk to each other in low, careful voices. They'd move around the house on schedules that seemed slightly adjusted, like they were orbiting something they didn't want to acknowledge. I went to school, worked my shifts, came home, made dinner, went to my room. Nobody screamed, nobody pushed, but nobody looked at me either. The house changed about 3 days after the letter arrived. The pantry got a padlock on it within 2 days. Specific shelves in the refrigerator were designated off-limits. They never technically refused me food, but they made it very clear what I was and wasn't allowed to touch. I'd come home hungry from a shift and find the pantry locked with a note about when they'd be back. Their leftover food sitting in the fridge I wasn't supposed to touch. I started documenting everything the way Nathan had told me to. Photos of the locked pantry, time-stamped. Photos of the empty shelves I was allowed to access. Their restaurant bags in the trash next to photos of my own meals, usually peanut butter toast or plain noodles. All of it backed up to a cloud account they'd never be able to get into. Anyway, that's the part that probably sounds dramatic written out, but honestly felt completely routine by that point. I'd been operating in survival mode long enough that building a legal file didn't feel weird. It just felt like another version of tracking expenses. Then the equipment situation happened. I came home from lawn work one Saturday to find all of my gear sitting in the middle of the yard, soaked through from a morning rain. My parents said they hadn't known it was going to rain and needed to move the car out of the garage for errands. My mower wouldn't start. I checked the engine, water damage, more expensive to repair than the thing was worth. I sat on the wet grass for a while and didn't move. Mrs. Okafor, my neighbor across the street, came out about an hour later and found me still sitting there. She looked at the mower, looked at my parents' car sitting dry in the driveway. Didn't ask what happened. She just told me to carry everything over to her garage right then and that I could keep it there permanently so this would never happen again. I loaded up the trimmer and everything else and walked it across the street. Grateful doesn't come close to covering it. My manager at the grocery store, Greg Alderman, had clearly been piecing things together. One evening during a slow stretch, he told me there was a permanent part-time slot open with consistent hours and a small raise. The steady schedule meant I could finally predict my income week to week, which sounds minor, but when you're stretching money that thin, it's actually everything. Employee grocery discounts knocked my food costs down noticeably too. A few days after that, I came home to find my dad in my room, going through my things. Bank statements out of order, documents in my desk drawer had clearly been moved. He said he had a right to know what I was doing with money while living in his house. I didn't argue. That afternoon, I opened a prepaid debit account online, moved most of my savings there, and set up direct deposit from work to go straight to it. My income became invisible to them. Around this time, Mrs. Holloway arranged a mediation meeting at school. Me, my parents, herself, and a district social worker, all sitting around a conference table. My parents went straight into complaint mode the moment they sat down. Dad ran through every perceived slight from the past month. Mom added her own list. The social worker let them go for a while, then redirected with one question. What specific things are you currently providing for your son? The room got quiet while they tried to come up with things beyond a roof over his head. She asked directly about food, clothing, and school supplies. My parents gave answers that were vague enough to mean nothing. Then she turned and asked me the same question. I walked through everything I'd been purchasing for myself since I was 12, month by month. My parents sat across from me looking like they were waiting for something painful to end. We left with a written agreement. No rent until I turned 17. I'd contribute through specific listed household chores. Food access remained open at all times. The social worker printed copies and had everyone sign. I photographed mine the moment I had it in my hand. My parents were not happy, but they signed. And for about 2 days after that, the house was genuinely quiet in a different way. Not the tense, silent treatment quiet of the previous weeks, just ordinary quiet. Like everyone had agreed, without saying it, to stand down for a moment and breathe. Then my dad did something that, looking back, was a serious miscalculation. I was working a shift at the grocery store, stocking shelves in the cereal aisle. I'd reorganized that aisle probably 4 times that week and was starting to have actual opinions about brand placement when I looked up and saw my dad walking through the front entrance. He was not there to shop. His face told me that before he got 10 feet inside. He walked straight toward me and started in, loudly, about how I was making them look like bad parents, dragging family business into the street, turning people against them. Customers were stopping to stare. I could feel my face going hot. Greg came out from the back room, walked over calmly, and placed himself between me and my dad. He told my father in a firm, level voice that he needed to leave the store immediately. My dad started in about his right to speak to his own son. Greg didn't move. He said if my dad didn't leave, he was calling the police for creating a disturbance. Something in Greg's expression settled it. My dad turned and walked out, through the door hard enough to shake the wall. I had to sit on a step stool for a few minutes. Greg came back over. "You did nothing wrong. We've got your back." His co-worker started filling out an incident report, date, time, full description, and told me if my dad ever came back, they'd call the police for trespassing without any hesitation. That was the moment the situation officially left my hands. Okay, I'm stopping right here. Listeners, me, not the OP, the same man who spent years holding court about hard work, personal responsibility, and the value of a dollar, drove to his 14-year-old kid's job and started screaming at him in public over a legal letter. In front of customers, in the cereal aisle. He got walked out of a grocery store because a manager threatened to call the cops if he didn't leave. You know how some people are always lecturing about consequences? Turns out that philosophy had an asterisk. It applied to everyone else. The Platinum Advice columnist, ladies and gentlemen, could not have scripted a better ending for that particular character arc. Mrs. Holloway filed a formal report with Child Welfare Services that evening after I told her what had happened at the store. 2 days later, I got a call from Ms. Raines, a caseworker who introduced herself and said she wanted to schedule a home visit to look into the situation. My parents went into full panic mode when I told them. Mom started deep cleaning every room in the house like we were being graded on baseboards. Dad spent the night coaching her on what to say, how they provided everything I needed, how I was overreacting to normal family disagreements, how this was all a misunderstanding. I listened to them rehearse from my room. I had no plans to perform. Ms. Raines showed up Thursday afternoon. Methodical, professional, kind in a matter-of-fact way. She asked all 3 of us baseline questions about the household and daily routines, then asked to speak with me alone in my room. I showed her the budget notebook, the documentation folder on my phone, the photos, the timestamps, 2 years of tracked expenses. She didn't look surprised. She took notes and asked clarifying questions about specific dates and amounts. After about an hour with me, she walked through the house room by room, photographed the pantry and fridge, and then had all 3 of us sit down in the living room. She told my parents, plainly and directly, that charging rent to a minor child wasn't legal under state law, that they were required to ensure I had consistent access to food and other basic necessities, and that she'd be conducting follow-up visits to monitor the situation going forward. My parents nodded and agreed to everything. Their faces were this specific combination of shame and barely contained fury, but the way Ms. Raines delivered it made clear she wasn't offering suggestions. She was describing conditions they would meet. The second her car pulled away from the curb, my mom walked straight to the pantry and ripped the padlock off without a word, threw it in the trash harder than necessary. My dad sat at the kitchen table, looking at his phone with his mouth tight. Neither of them said anything to me. The rent contract disappeared off the counter. Nobody mentioned it again. Over the following weeks, my parents started a slow, resentful drift toward functioning like actual parents. Food appeared in the pantry that I was allowed to eat without asking. My mom picked up a part-time job at a retail store in the mall and came home every night complaining about standing on her feet for hours and dealing with difficult customers. The educational opportunity in that was not lost on me, but I kept it to myself. My dad eventually landed a position doing overnight shift work at a distribution center. Left at 9, came back at 6 in the morning, slept most of the day. Too tired to start arguments, which made the evenings noticeably quieter. Then they tried one more creative approach. My mom came to me in the hallway one evening with a bright expression and proposed a chore credit system. The idea was that I'd earn points for doing household tasks, and those points would apply toward contributing to the bills. She presented it like she'd just thought of something genuinely new. I looked at her for a second. Then I said, "That's rent with extra steps, and the answer is still no." Her smile dropped and she went to complain to my dad about how difficult I was being. I emailed Nathan about it that night. He told me to document it clearly and keep declining. So I did. Mrs. Holloway helped me apply for a dual enrollment program a few weeks later. High school students taking actual college courses at the community college, tuition and books covered by the district. She walked me through the application in her classroom after school and wrote me a reference letter. I submitted everything and tried not to get my hopes up. A few weeks after that, on a Wednesday evening after a shift, I checked my email and found the acceptance notice. Full scholarship for books and transportation. Starting in September, I'd spend mornings at the community college and afternoons finishing high school requirements. I printed the letter and brought it out to show my parents. Dad looked it over and said, "That's good." Mom mentioned it would save money on tuition eventually. Their reaction stung a little. I'd worked hard to make that happen. But I was learning finally not to need their applause. Final update. About a month after the caseworker visit, we all sat down at the kitchen table with a formal written agreement. No rent until I turned 17. Specific household chores listed out. Pantry and fridge to remain accessible to me at all times. No locks, no restrictions. My income was mine, and I wasn't obligated to contribute to household expenses. We all signed at the bottom. I photographed my copy on the spot, and Mrs. Holloway kept the original in her files at school. 2 months after that, the big TV disappeared from the living room. Mom said they'd sold it to pay down credit card debt. The expensive sports package had been canceled permanently, too. The living room looked different without it, and I could tell they both hated every step of that. Dad complained about missing games. Mom kept mentioning how small the TV in their bedroom was by comparison. I didn't say that I'd been making exactly those kinds of trades, want versus need, luxury versus necessity, since I was 12. Didn't seem like the right time. Mom started attending a free financial literacy seminar her employer offered during lunch breaks. One evening I came home and found her at the kitchen table with budgeting worksheets spread out, going through income and expense columns. She asked me a couple questions about how I tracked my lawn care income. We had a normal conversation about money, just practical, back and forth, no defensiveness. For the first time I could remember. It didn't fix anything, but it was something. Ms. Raines did monthly follow-up visits for several more months. Each time my parents presented the stocked fridge, open pantry, and Mom's new budgeting progress. Things stayed stable. The dual enrollment program started in September. Real college credits before I graduated high school. My lawn business had fully recovered. Professional-grade equipment in Mrs. Okafor's organized garage. A scheduling board she'd set up so I could see which clients needed what each week. She'd also labeled every shelf and hung a whiteboard near the door for tracking supply runs. I don't know why that detail has stayed with me, but it has. Greg had started showing me how to actually read a payroll statement during slow shifts, withholdings, deductions, how to plan for taxes. He treated me like a real employee who happened to be young, which meant more than he probably knew. My parents and I don't have a close relationship. I'm not sure we ever will, and I stopped waiting for that to change somewhere around the time I started college. But things are functional now in a way they weren't. Mom asks what I want from the store when she's going out. We have dinner together occasionally. Last week it was chicken and rice, nothing special, and we talked about normal things. A quiz I'd done well on, a frustrating customer at her job, something that had broken at Dad's work. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody mentioned money. We just ate and talked, and then I helped load the dishwasher and went to my room. Ordinary. Which for us is actually a lot. It's not the family I would have picked, but I built enough of my own foundation that it doesn't really have to be anything more than what it is. I still have the original budget notebook, by the way. Every dollar I made and spent from age 12, right up through the first year of college. I don't know why I've held on to it. Probably doesn't matter anymore. Look, I'm not going to pretend this kid had it all figured out from day one. He didn't. He spent 2 years looking normal while dealing with things no middle schooler should have to deal with alone. But the moment his parents put a contract on the table, he didn't fold. He didn't beg. He went and got a lawyer, documented everything, and let the system do exactly what it was built to do. Sometimes standing your ground just means refusing to sign something. Drop your take in the comments. What would you have done in his position? And if you're not subscribed, hit that button so you don't miss what's coming next.